It's 10:03 now. Welcome and good morning. If you're here for the Oakland General Plan Update Housing Element Workshop 3, you're in the right place. And I wanted to welcome you all and thank you so much for attending the third of many workshops that's being planned for the General Plan Update and the Housing Element Update. My name is Lakshmi Rajagopalan, and I'm the project manager for the General Plan Update. And with me, I have staff from the city and the General Plan and the consultant team. You would see most of them have a star in front of their name. If key members from the staff and the General Plan consultant team can wave so that everyone can see who you are, that'll be great. So we can, next slide, please.
We do have interpretation available for this meeting if that's something that you'd like to take advantage of. We will be running it, so it's something that everyone will have to also turn on their Zoom settings. If you're joining on a desktop computer, a smartphone, or an iPad, you will see in just a moment, I'll turn it on now, a little icon down at the bottom of your screen where the mute and the video options are, and it looks like a globe and it says language interpretation. In just a minute, you will see you'll have to select your audio channel. So it'll say there are languages available for interpretation. If you'd like to listen to English, you will need to click English. It's like a radio station. And if you would like to be in either a Spanish language speaking breakout group later on in the workshop or a Cantonese language speaking breakout group, we ask that you please raise your hands so that I can sort you into those groups where we will have interpreters available. Could the Cantonese interpreter please repeat that back to the audience?
方會有即時口譯服務提供。若果你去到你個熒光幕下邊嘅工具列嗰度咧，將會發覺會有一個地球儀嘅圖示嘅。請你單擊進入地球儀嗰個圖示嗰作選取你想需要嘅語言。如果你想用英語收聽呢個工作坊嘅話，都要請你選擇英語。如果你想選擇廣東話，請你用 Chinese 中文。若果喺陣間分組討論裏邊咧，你想被分組進入嗰個小組係由廣東話嘅咧，我哋將會有翻譯提供俾你。咁請你舉手提示，我哋就會將你安排入廣東話嘅小組分享裏面㗎啦。若果以流動裝置嘅咧，你個角落頭有3點，請你喺個3點嗰度咧單擊入去選擇你嘅語言。多謝各位 ，thank you。
Oh, one more thing. If you would like to raise your hand to be in a breakout group, that is down at the bottom of the screen in the reactions, or it will look like a little hand icon as well, or you could message it into the chat, which we have running as well. Could you please repeat that back as well? Could you please explain how to raise hand?
OK， 如果你喺個工作列嗰度咧，將會有一個選擇就係舉手或者叫做回饋嘅。咁你喺個單擊進入裏邊咧，就會揾到你舉手嗰個圖示㗎啦。
Thank you. And then Spanish interpreters, could one of you please explain how to use the interpretation tool and also raise hand if you'd like to be in a Spanish language breakout group? Maybe Vicky.
Hay diferentes idiomas en esta reunión que va a haber hoy. Si ustedes están en una computadora, lo que pueden hacer es un icono en la parte de abajo de la computadora que es un globo. Pueden seleccionar el idioma que quieren usar ustedes. Pueden seleccionar el español. Si quieren seleccionar español, pueden también seleccionar el inglés o el cantonés. También si quieren entrar a un grupo de breakout, pueden seleccionar el grupo que quieran ustedes en el idioma que quieran, cantonés o español. Pueden levantar la mano también. Hay una parte abajo donde está el chat, donde pueden levantar la mano.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to turn interpretation on now, so please select the language channel that you'd like to go in. And that'll pop down at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to go into the English language channel, as should presenters who are presenting in English.
Thank you, Hazel. So I just wanted to start the meeting with a quick review of today's protocol. This meeting is happening on Zoom and will be recorded for future viewing. We will also include the chat transcripts as part of the meeting notes. And we will have discussions in breakout rooms, and breakout room facilitators will have a star or an asterisk symbol right next to their name. We did not receive any request for interpretation services. However, we have Spanish and Cantonese interpreters. So the first half of the presentation will be in English. However, when we move into discussion groups, we will provide interpretation in Spanish and Cantonese. Please raise your hand using the raise hand icon from the reactions button in the toolbar if you would like to request for interpretation, and we will assign you to separate breakout rooms. Next slide, please. We realize and acknowledge that these meetings or workshops around housing are more than just meeting state requirements and deadlines that staff have to meet, city has to meet. These are deeply personal and traumatic for people sharing their experiences with housing. The housing crisis in Oakland impacts many of us, and we do not want to minimize or compound harm. We ask that everyone, including staff and community members, come to these conversations with respect, care, and a listening ear. We have a resource document with with a list of housing resources available for Oakland and Alameda County. Allison, Allison just posted it on the chat, the link to this document on chat. In addition, we are also working on scheduling a separate session that will be open to the public with a trained trauma-informed facilitator to open more discussions about housing and its impact on the Oakland community. Next slide, please. So in today's meeting, we will start with an overview of the general plan update process and the housing element update process, the project schedule, our approach to community engagement, a recap of what we heard in the previous workshop, and focus on strategies to address housing protections and preservation, including tenant protections, preserving existing affordable housing, creating more home ownership, and community planning. We welcome your input at this workshop, and your input will guide the development of strategies, programs, and actions for Oakland's housing element. All event recordings and summaries of the previous 2 housing element workshops and other community engagement events can be found on the General Plan Update website. Thank you. Next slide, please. Next slide. The general plan is a guiding document for the city of Oakland. It provides a consistent direction for future development and is also an opportunity to engage our community in the planning and decision-making process. The general plan establishes city-wide vision and provides supporting goals, policies, and implementation measures around equitable housing and equitable location and development of housing, the number and quality of parks and open spaces, built environment, how people get around, especially bicyclists, children, persons with disabilities, pedestrians, and seniors, and it also impacts who's able to stay and thrive in this economy. The general plan also provides an opportunity to engage our community in the planning and decision-making process and reduce racial inequities. So why are we updating the general plan now? Most of the city's current general plan were developed over 20 years ago in the 90s. With this comprehensive update, the city has the opportunity to advance its commitment to create a fair and just city through equitable goals, policies, and implementation measures. And this update is happening in 2 phases because some topics or elements such as housing, safety, environmental justice have to be adopted sooner than others. So as part of phase 1, next slide, please. The city will be updating the housing and safety elements and will create a new environmental justice element and will also adopt an industrial lands policy. In phase 2, we will be updating the land use and transportation open space element, and we will also create a new infrastructure and facilities element. Next slide, please. The development of the housing element is happening as part of phase 1 and is also structured around state mandated periods of when this element has to be adopted, be available for review, public review, and also to submit it to the state for their review. So we will have the draft of the public review draft of the housing element first in May, And after we send it to the state in June, we will have it again for public review in October. And throughout this general plan process, inclusive engagement is key, where there will be several types of community engagement happening throughout the entire year. That includes pop-up events, engagement with youth, community hubs, town halls, and neighborhood workshops, and also a period of focused engagement around housing specific activities, such as these housing workshops and focus group meetings that is currently happening now and will go into spring. In addition, we will also have other opportunities to share input throughout the year, including at town hall meetings, neighborhood visioning workshops, online engagements, and workshops to discuss environmental justice and safety. Next slide, please. In phase 2, we will be updating the land use, transportation, and open space elements, and we will also create a new infrastructure and facilities element. Even though the general plan update is happening in 2 phases, because of state guidelines and deadlines, work happening in phase 1 will inform phase 2. So the community engagement that's happening in phase 1 will be used to ground truth the information that we have analyzed, and that will inform the topics that we are addressing and updating in phase 2. Thank you. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, the community engagement effort is inclusive and will comprise of an extensive outreach process, engaging stakeholders throughout the community with additional resources, specific resources dedicated to engaging communities who were historically underrepresented and excluded from traditional planning processes. All the community input that is shared will be used to ground truth available data based on people's lived experiences and inform areas of focus on general plan elements and guide the development of general plan policies. The general plan update team includes the deeply rooted collaborative in partnership with 13 community-based organizations who will be working to conduct community engagement for Oakland's most impacted residents. This includes working class communities, communities of color, unhoused people, formerly incarcerated and undocumented folks, youth, and communities who are experiencing environmental injustices. There will be over 100 engagement activities, including neighborhood town hall workshops, pop-up events, discussion groups, online engagement, and cultural events to make sure that we hear from Oakland residents as they share their issues and solutions and their vision for Oakland's future. The general plan update team will also be providing information on various city resources to address Oakland's residents' immediate needs. Next slide, please. So from October 2021 to this past weekend, the team has conducted outreach in Eastmont, Fruitvale, San Antonio, Chinatown, Hoover Elementary in West Oakland, and also at the Oakland Asian Cultural Center's Asian Pacific New Year celebration and the Black Joy Parade. At these in-person community embedded events and online, the team is engaged with over 900 people in person with a majority, with a majority of individuals being from communities of color. We have also hosted 2 workshops that have been focused on key housing issues in the city, including identifying opportunities for planning new housing, issues and challenges in planning for more housing in certain areas, and types of housing that Oakland needs more of, and strategies that could aid in the production of affordable housing. Around 170 people participated in these workshops. In addition, based on community feedback from community members, council members, community-based organizations, and also from residents, from members attending these workshops, we are also specifically reaching out to organizations that may not have participated in the past to conduct focus meetings that are in addition to these larger community workshops. And as I mentioned earlier, all event summaries and meeting recordings and notes will be posted on the website in the community events and public meetings page in around a week after the event. And we will also post the translated documents in Spanish and Chinese soon after. Thank you. Next slide, please. We have several events planned, with some of them highlighted in the slide, and we are also working on finalizing the dates for a couple more events. And you can find the information for all these events on our website, and also can register for these workshops and talk to the general plan update team to identify your concerns, identify key solutions, and share your vision for how Oakland should look like in the future. Next slide, please. So there will be 4 workshops for the community to come together, identify issues, and come up with solutions and opportunities to address the housing crisis. At the last 2 workshops, we introduced the housing element and sought your input for where housing should go and on potential strategies and solutions. In today's workshop, we will talk more specifically about ways to preserve affordable housing, protect tenants, and talk more about anti-displacement strategies, as we know and we have heard that this is a key community concern. At the 4th workshop that will be scheduled in May, the first public review draft of the housing element will be available before we send it to the state HCD, the Housing and Community Development Department, for review. And we will make sure that this reflects what you told us. I would like to turn it over to Allison Moore now for the next couple of slides.
Thanks so much. Thanks for attending, everyone. And before we talk about anti-displacement and tenant protections, we are just curious. I'm going to launch a quick Zoom poll. Have you attended a previous housing element workshop? Please let us know. Of the people who responded to this question, it looks about half and sort of half and half. 53% have not. Welcome to the 3rd housing workshop, and 47% have. Great. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. All right. So just a bit of background about the housing element. The housing element is a blueprint to meet the housing needs of all Oaklanders and must be certified by the state. It has to be adopted on a state mandated schedule. Like all Bay Area cities, it must be adopted by January 2023, and it will cover the next 8 years from 2023 to 2031. Generally, a housing element has 3 parts. The first is a background analysis, which helps us get a handle on what Oaklanders' existing needs are. The second part is the housing sites inventory, which helps Oakland plan for where new housing will go. And the third part, perhaps the most important, is the housing action plan, which represents the strategies and actions the city commits to so that there are both adequate sites and that housing needs of Oaklanders are met. Oakland's housing crisis is complex and requires 3 high-level actions. These include housing production, so that's building more housing, especially housing that is affordable for lower income people. Protections, so protecting tenants by preventing displacement and homelessness by keeping rents under control and discouraging evictions. And preservation, which helps keep existing housing stock of affordable homes affordable. We focused on production at the last meetings, but we want to use the time today to brainstorm with you all about the challenges and the best ways that the city can help keep people in their homes and keep housing affordable. 2 of the things that we're going to be talking about today are gentrification and displacement. I'm going to share a quick 5-minute clip from the Urban Displacement Project that can help put the term in context, especially how gentrification is linked to discriminatory actions of the past. So I'm going to stop my share, and Hazel, if you could play our video.
One sec, making sure that the screen share is going to be optimized. Here we go.
Gentrification is a process of neighborhood change that includes economic change in a historically disinvested neighborhood by means of real estate investment and new, higher income residents moving in, as well as demographic change, not only in terms of income level, but also in terms of changes in the education level or racial makeup of residents. Gentrification is complex and needs some explaining. To understand it, there are three key things to consider: the historic conditions, especially policies and practices that made communities susceptible to gentrification, the way that central city disinvestment and investment patterns are taking place today as a result of these conditions, and the ways that gentrification impacts communities. Over the last century, many policies and practices have created racialized patterns of disinvestment in city centers that have left low-income communities of color particularly susceptible to gentrification. From the 1930s through the late 60s, standards set by the federal government and carried out by banks explicitly labeled neighborhoods home to predominantly people of color as risky and unfit for investment. This practice, now known as redlining, meant that people of color were denied access to loans that would enable them to buy or repair homes in their neighborhood. Other housing and transportation policies of the mid-20th century fueled the growth of mostly white suburbs and the exodus of capital from urban centers, in a phenomenon often referred to as white flight. Take the GI Bill as an example. The program guaranteed low-cost mortgage loans for returning World War II soldiers, but discrimination limited the extent to which Black veterans were able to purchase homes in the growing suburbs. In fact, the Federal Housing Administration largely required that suburban developers agree to not sell houses to Black people in order for the developers to access these guaranteed loans. Left behind in central city neighborhoods, low-income households and communities of color bore the brunt of highway system expansion and urban renewal programs, which resulted in the mass clearance of homes, businesses, and neighborhood institutions, and set the stage for widespread public and private disinvestment in the decades that followed. In more recent history, the foreclosure crisis also contributed to neighborhood-level vulnerability to gentrification. In low-income communities of color, disproportionate levels of subprime lending resulted in mass foreclosure, leaving those neighborhoods vulnerable to investors seeking to purchase and flip homes in bulk. Today, both people and capital are flooding back into these historically disinvested neighborhoods. One reason new people are moving into these neighborhoods is because of their relative affordability. In many U.S. cities, the rental market has gotten increasingly expensive, and even moderate-income earners are on the hunt for lower housing costs. This means that in some places, they are looking in historically disinvested communities, often the same neighborhoods previous generations left behind during the days of white flight. These neighborhoods are often characterized by older historic housing stock that appeals to new residents and close proximity to city centers, where jobs, restaurants, and art spaces are increasingly locating. Cities are also investing in revitalizing some of these neighborhoods, for example with improved transit access and infrastructure, in part to draw in newcomers. On the ground, gentrification may look like real estate speculation, with investors flipping properties for large profits, as well as high-end development, and landlords looking for higher-paying tenants. Increased investment in neighborhood amenities like transit and parks. Changes in land use, for example, from industrial land to restaurants and storefronts. And changes in the character of the neighborhood, as community-run businesses are replaced by businesses catering to new residents' needs. While increased investment in an area can be positive, gentrification is often associated with displacement, which means that, in some of these communities, longtime residents are not able to stay to benefit from new investments in housing, healthy food access, or transit infrastructure. Instead, lower-income families, often families of color, may find themselves facing rent increases, evictions, or other displacement pressures, and left with no other choice but to move to suburban or even exurban areas, far away from their jobs and the businesses and service providers they know. This can mean more time commuting, less time spent at home, and increased isolation, depression, and stress levels. For children,
Do you want me to stop here, Allison?
Yep, great. Thank you so much, Hazel. So I'm going to go back to my presentation now. So as we heard in the video, displacement is associated with gentrification, and displacement is another term that has multiple meanings as well. There can be a few types of displacement. Direct displacement, where residents can no longer afford to remain in their homes due to rising housing costs or other actions like lease non-renewals, evictions, and landlords not maintaining homes. Indirect displacement, where units being vacated by lower income residents are no longer affordable to other low income households, which is also known as exclusionary displacement. And then there's also cultural displacement, where there are changes in the aspects of a neighborhood that have provided long-term residents with a sense of belonging and allowed residents to live their lives in familiar ways. The relationship between gentrification and displacement is also complex. Community investment, including building new housing, is crucial for all Oakland neighborhoods. And while research has shown that such investments alone do not directly cause displacement, they may create the conditions for it by putting pressure on low-income residents. And this statement should not undercut just how painful and serious displacement is. It can have negative and long-lasting impacts on people's physical and mental health. It can affect children's academic performance, community resilience and culture, and even a community's political power. So the key is to encourage community investment without increasing neighborhood displacement pressures. So what does gentrification and displacement look like in Oakland in the data? So as production has lagged of housing, the ability of both renters and owners to find housing affordable to their incomes has continued to decrease. Rates of homelessness also remain high and have increased by 47% between 2017 and 2019. Oakland's population has lost 30% of its Black community in the time period from 2000 to 2019. And according to urban displacement data from 2018, nearly half of all households in Oakland live in tracts at risk of or experiencing gentrification, and almost a quarter live in tracts susceptible to or experiencing displacement. So the question that we really want to hear from you all today is, how can we keep Oaklanders in their communities, and how can we make it so that everyone benefits from positive changes in Oakland? Another key piece of this issue is housing preservation, which means retaining existing affordable housing and protecting its affordability for current and future tenants. We learned a bit about the challenges in developing new affordable housing at the last meeting, namely financing. So preserving existing built affordable housing is important. And when we talk about preserving affordable housing, there are two types. There is deed restricted housing, which means housing that comes with a set of rules and regulations that help lock in affordability. And then non-deed restricted housing, which you may hear described as naturally occurring affordable housing that doesn't receive any subsidy. And we'll hear more about how the city is addressing housing preservation in just a minute. So what are we hearing in the community? Through outreach, we've heard that gentrification and displacement threaten Oakland's vibrant culture and take away from the community's ability to support each other. Families and individuals who've been affected by the recession, including evictions, foreclosures, and predatory lending, have been displaced and must travel farther away to maintain their connections and employment. Renters are facing increasing rents, both legal and illegal increases, and fear evictions. Many are forced to live in unsafe housing conditions because landlords will not repair buildings or cannot repair them because of home repair costs.
Hi, Allison, this is Kalila. Do you think you could pause for a moment so the interpreters could catch up, and then going forward, could you just slow down a bit so that they can interpret along with you?
Certainly, I'm sorry.
No problem. Thank you so much.
All right, so just going back, Oaklanders have also recommended solutions to these issues, including rent control, exploration of community land trusts and opportunities for tenants to purchase, city programs, grants, or loans for home repairs, and protections from predatory lending. Oaklanders also want to see creative ways to bring people back who were displaced and bring them back as homeowners. So the city's housing and community development staff are here now to tell us a little bit about what key programs they've worked on recently related to tenant protections and affordable housing preservation, and also tell us what's in the works. I will turn it over to Caleb now to say a bit more.
Thank you, Allison. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Caleb Smith. I'm a policy analyst for the City of Oakland's Department of Housing and Community Development. as we look forward to hearing your feedback today for these conversations, we wanted to provide a little bit of a baseline of some of the things the City of Oakland's been doing to implement the policies in the last housing element.
Hi, Caleb. Could you also slow down as well so that
Sorry.
we can have the simultaneous translation? Thank you
Sorry.
so much.
So we want to start by talking a little bit about housing preservation. So for some of the work that we're already doing on housing preservation, we would divide that into two main categories. The first category would be some of our work to acquire, rehabilitate, and preserve housing that is already affordable and make it so that there are restrictions long-term to keep it affordable. Two recent programs that we've embarked on to make that happen has first off been a notice of funding availability for housing preservation and for the acquisition and conversion to affordable housing. In this grant program, we have made available $10.6 million in 2021, including $4.2 million specifically for land trusts and limited equity cooperatives. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Another program that the City of Oakland has pursued is the state's HomeKey program. So far, Oakland has received $21.3 million to acquire 162 housing units in 2020. Another kind of housing preservation is making sure that homes that people are living in affordably are able to stay in the housing stock, so physically preserving those homes. For that purpose, we have single-family preservation programs. Each year, our department serves approximately 24 low-income homeowners with safety home repairs, accessibility improvements, and lead safety work. The City of Oakland also administers a program to help 2 to 5 unit buildings with seismic safety work so people can safely live in them. Finally, to promote homeownership, the City of Oakland has helped 211 Oaklanders through our first-time homebuyer program in the past decade. And thank you. So we also have been making progress on tenant protections and stabilization. Firstly, Oakland has shifted to a proactive model of tenant protection enforcement, which means we're looking for violations to correct rather than waiting for people to bring concerns to our attention. Furthermore, Oakland has an eviction moratorium in place for most evictions due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This remains the case despite the fact that the state of California has repealed the state-level moratorium. The City of Oakland also has just cause protections against evictions for most apartments built prior to 1996. This means that there are limited reasons why a landlord can legally evict a tenant. They can't evict them simply because they don't like the tenant. Furthermore, Oakland also limits annual rent increases for most apartments built before 1983. Since the last housing element update, Oakland voters have extended these protections to duplexes and triplexes, which were previously exempt. On the front of emergency rental assistance, since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, the City of Oakland and its partner organizations have distributed almost $19 million in rental assistance to help almost 3,800 households stay in their homes. There are a few things that we see coming up that we're working on. We continue to pursue funding through the state's HomeKey program. Oakland has applied for 659 housing units in 2021 for a total of $162.7 million in state funding, and we're currently waiting to hear back on this request. The City of Oakland also expects to issue another preservation, acquisition, and conversion to affordable housing notice of funding availability in summer 2022. The City of Oakland also has a pending application for more state funding to assist with our first-time homebuyer down payment assistance program. Finally, the City of Oakland is applying for a federal program, the Section 108 loan program, which is going to help us preserve our existing affordable housing portfolio and keep those units affordable. Next slide, please. Now, something that we think about as a department, and we encourage y'all to think about for our conversation today, is with the limited resources that are available for affordable housing, how can we best target and prioritize these resources for new or expanded programs that meet the greatest community needs? I know this meeting is very important for the general plan process, but as someone in the housing department, I'm also looking forward to hearing your feedback about how we can improve Oakland's day-to-day housing work. Thank you very much, and back to you, Allison.
Thanks so much, Caleb. So I'm going to launch another poll in just a second about whether or not you have heard of any of these programs. For some reason, I'm having trouble with the poll, but if people could raise their hands. Before Caleb's presentation, had you heard about any of these housing programs before?
Allison, I can call on hands as I see them. First is Tuan, followed by George, and then I'll call on the others. Thank you.
Right.
It looks like you have the poll up now, though. Just.
Oh, does it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
My
Oh,
screen
great.
is
Okay.
housing programs. Yes.
There we go. Fantastic.
If another co-host could then read out the results of the poll at the end, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I can see it now, so thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, so which of these programs had you heard of before this presentation? We're just curious to know.
Yeah, we'll wait for. Okay. Allison, let me know when you close the poll. I can.
Sure thing. There's still a couple of responses coming in. I'll just give it 5 more seconds. All right. So I'll share the results. It looks like most of you have heard of Project Home Key and the First Time Home Buyer program. And then in terms of what people are interested in, First Time Home Buyer program and funding for affordable housing preservation, followed by the rent adjustment program. Thank you so much.
And there also seems to be not only 19% of people participating here have heard that the city offers housing counseling for housing, and they would like to, they're more interested in this. Thank you.
Great. All right, so next we're going to move into our period of question and answer. Lakshmi will help facilitate this. We're hoping to get your ideas on where the city should focus its efforts, as Caleb mentioned, based on your knowledge of community needs. And then we'll use breakout rooms after to discuss what you think is working well, where the gaps are, and other ideas you have to keep Oaklanders in their homes after this period. I'll turn it over to you, Lakshmi.
Thank you. So the first hand I see raised is Tuan N, followed by Donna. Tuan, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, I'd like to just follow up with questions regarding effective housing policies. So I feel like with the limited public funding that we have, we should prioritize our unhoused residents who don't even have a roof over our heads, their heads. And then next, I think in terms of, there's very little, we have all these programs, but we don't have any data or metrics as far as which program are most effective at delivering housing to most people and where the needs are most. And when I actually did my own research in Washington, D.C., what was most effective was rental assistance. And Washington, D.C. spent over 50% of its affordable annual housing budget on rental assistance. And that is followed by down payment assistance for the first-time home buyer programs. And then after that was homeless resources, shelters, and wraparound supportive services. What was very interesting was in terms of what you guys have braced up about preservation. DC has a program over there called Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. And that program is actually being defunded in Washington, DC. And there was very little data to show that was effective at preservation. And it's also, DC is also removing properties from TOPA restrictions. So the other thing I like to raise up is an example of the preservation effort that we have in Oakland is the house on Magnolia Street. That's the Moms for Housing homeless preservation project. And what it is we were told that please sell this home to the Housing Land Trust and we can get people off the street tonight. But what actually happened was the home was sold to the Housing Land Trust, and Oakland gave about $12 million that year to the Housing Land Trust to acquire properties for preservation. But what actually happened was 2 years later, this home sits vacant and empty, and there's homeless encampment that's growing 2 blocks away, and there's no accountability for what happens to that money and how effective that is. Now, most people are saying, oh, okay, well, what happened? But when I looked at the preservation program across the country, this is not a surprising result in terms of where the money goes, the accountability, and who can actually deliver on affordable housing at a low cost rent to residents. So my request is for there to be accountability with public funding, and that we shouldn't put out any money without any financial metrics and tangible deliverables. I'll just leave it there and let other people have a chance to speak. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tuan. The next person is Donna, followed by Christopher Norman.
And hello, my name is Donna Murphy, and I think I just raised my hand because of the poll and you had said raise your hand. So, but I appreciate the previous speaker's comments. That was right on. I work in affordable housing for over 20 years, and you know, it's just disheartening. I work in Deep East Oakland, a lot of unhoused individuals. I just like to pay attention and be in support of whatever I can do to be part of this process. So I'm just here today to lend my support and advocacy as best I can. And I thank you.
Thank you so much, Donna, for your comments and for your support. We have Christopher Norman, followed by Commissioner Scott.
Yes, hello. My name is Chris Norman. I'm a D3 resident in Oakland. Two quick things. I think number one, I would, if anyone needs to go into the information that the first speaker shared, I would fact check that. I know the people in the Magnolia House, and I know they're occupying it. The money was well spent. That's something that needs to be fact checked. But number two, with the COVID pandemic and the eviction moratorium that was set, that might expire if once the council decides it, right? There's a lawsuit against council that from some landlords that's trying to make it expire. And I think my question for this group, so that I hope you can help us answer, is how can the housing element, our planning, how can we make sure that we're positioning ourselves to protect tenants once this moratorium does expire? Because there's going to be a large number of people that are at risk of eviction. And I would love to just use our collective thought, our thinking around how we can position ourselves as a city to support those people when that moment comes. Thank you.
Can somebody from HCD respond?
Hi, this is Shanae Franklin Minor. I can respond to that slightly. I'm the program manager for the rent adjustment program, and we are the agency that is charged with administering the rent ordinance and just cause. We have housing counseling. Just wanted to shout that out. We have housing counseling available Monday through Friday, 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 every day for any housing related questions, landlord tenant issues. Not to find and locate housing, but to navigate some of these challenges of this time. We provide holistic housing counseling. Calls are generally limited to about 10 minutes a person. And then we also have a RAP email that you can email. It's called RAP, R-A-P, at oaklandca.gov if you prefer to communicate and ask your questions via email. With regards to the eviction moratorium, one thing that the rent adjustment program is looking into is trying to see if we can create a program that is a right to counsel. We're looking at expanding our funding for legal services to ensure that folks that call our office really have access, both property owners and tenants have access to representation. We're looking at small property owners for that and all tenants because that can include a lot of the in-depth counseling related to some of these threats or fears of eviction, and also the small claim actions that might follow. But one thing I do want to just highlight and point out is that the eviction moratorium in Oakland is one of the strongest in the country. And even when the moratorium expires, with relation to tenants, tenants have if they were unable to pay rent during the moratorium, as a result of a COVID-related issue, they can never be evicted. So they're protected even beyond the expiration of the moratorium for any past rent that accrued during this period of the local emergency. And so if folks have any questions, any issues, concerns about what they might individually be facing after this moratorium is up, or even during the moratorium currently, please call our office or send us an email. Again, the phone number is 510-238-3721, and the email is rap@oaklandca.gov. Thank you.
Matty Scott, followed by Stuart Flashman. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see Donna Murphy here too. She's working with with the Commission on Aging on our housing task force. All of the concerns that you have highlighted are doubly important to seniors, because the seniors in Oakland historically are at more risk of losing their housing than others. And among the unhoused population in Oakland, among the people over 50, a very large percentage of them became unhoused after the age of 50, meaning that they had housing, they had jobs, et cetera, before that. And one crisis can throw you into homelessness. One of the things that we're really focusing on the commission is the idea of wraparound services and targeted case management, so that people who are in need of one kind of service and receiving some sort of aid for that, or assistance or counseling, may well be at risk in another area. And it would really help the housing. I was not aware of the housing counseling per se. And it's one of the things we'd like to have is the sort of the wraparound counseling that is available to meet people's needs, help them meet their needs regardless of the label, to break down the silos between departments so that people are looked at through the lens of who they are and what their needs are, rather than which department is simply which department happens to be the one that they knocked on at that particular time. And supportive services for affordable housing are also a real need. People in affordable housing need to have full access to the kinds of services that they need. And that's kind of low hanging fruit for the city. There they are, you can find them and you can help serve them better. Thank you. Thank you for doing all of this. I have to leave it at 11 and I'm hoping that there's a recorded version of this that I can watch later on.
Yes, we will post the recording in a week.
Thank you.
much.
Thank you so much.
For your comments. Stuart Flashman, followed by Raul Maldonado. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for doing this. I wanted to raise one point in terms of some of the various programs that are trying to promote permanent affordability. And a lot of that is done with deed restrictions, and some of it is also done in terms of basically the incentive programs for this from the state that saying, you know, with afforded density bonus. And all of those are supposed to be recorded on the deeds. And the question is enforcement. I know of situations where, for example, this was a while back in Emeryville, they had a redevelopment agency sponsored program for first-time homeowners. It was supposed to be restricted. The had to be owner occupied, and there were restrictions on the sale. Those were not enforced. And so a lot of the units ended up being sold to speculators, people who would rent them out. Since Emeryville didn't have rent control, they were, and these were condominiums, so there was no controls on the rent, and there was no controls on the who owned them and how they transferred. And I'm concerned, and also in terms of density bonus, I understand that there are rental projects that were supposed to have a certain percentage of the units that were supposed to be below market rate. But again, when people would come in to ask about renting a unit, they were not told about those. So there seems to be a problem with enforcement on this, and I think that's something that needs to be thought about. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flashman. Raul, followed by Ali.
Hey, how's it going? I just wanted to ask, would there be a highlight or discussion about where to specifically place affordable housing and like other types of low and very low income housing? Will there be discussion about like where that placement of such housing, allocation of housing would be, or is that like in the next workshop? I see everything about like these services related to, you know, affordability, right? But what about like the housing production and like the placement of it or the allocation of it? Thank you. That's my question.
Alison, I can answer and then you can follow up. So as part of this housing element, we will have a sites inventory that provides a detailed listing of the list of sites in Oakland, along with the income the incomes that these sites will be allocated to, and the capacity that these sites will be developed to. So we already had that workshop. That was one of the first workshops that we had, the discussions.
And Raul, I've just put a link in the chat to where you can see those meeting recordings as well as the notes.
Ali, and I think that's the last speaker for today.
Hi, this is Allie. I'm a District 1 resident, and I'm a wheelchair user and organize people with disabilities in the Bay, and also work in affordable housing. And I think I just wanted to note that as a resident who's like really committed to supporting folks who are originally from here. I'm a little concerned about the fact that only 200 and something residents have benefited from the first time home ownership program over the past 10 years. That seems concerning. Like, I think it sounds like a really great program, and I wonder how there's able to be like an increase in the effectiveness of getting people engaged in that program and getting people supported. I also just wanted to note that, like, as someone who's looked for housing myself, the only, like, very little of the rent controlled housing and the naturally occurring affordable housing is accessible to people like myself with who use a wheelchair. And I would love to see, I'm curious about, the an possible increase in home repair programs so that people who are maybe developing disabilities or older adults, that they can get the accessibility needs met and paid for in their homes so that they don't have to leave or get stuck. And I would love to see more and more investment in and prioritization of funding for taking housing off the speculative market overall. There's some really great models here in Oakland of organizers who have made that happen in partnership with the Oakland Land Trust. And I think those could be really models for how to replicate that more in the city and give entities that are doing this work more funding to in the ways that they need it. So overall, just wanted to make sure that the city continues to center people most impacted by this issue and not and ensure that people with disabilities, particularly Black and Brown people with disabilities, are centered in the housing element process and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments, Ali. So I think, Allison, we can move on to the next.
Yeah. So what we're going to do now is go into breakout rooms to have a more in-depth discussion. And did just want to reiterate again, just some of these conversations can be challenging and personal. And we want to make sure that we're creating a respectful place where people can have conversations about these issues. Part of this will include making space to listen, and your facilitators will check in with you before we report back to make sure we're communicating about your experience in a way that feels right. So we'll have about 40-ish minutes for discussion in small groups. We have a few guiding questions, so you're free to discuss whichever questions you'd like or other topics. These include, maybe as part of introductions, what are the housing issues you care about in Oakland? How can Oakland add more housing while protecting tenants from displacement? Have you heard of any of these programs? Which do you think are working well, and where are the gaps? We got a little bit into that in the Q&A. With limited resources available, how should the city target and prioritize resources for new or expanded programs that meet the greatest community needs? What other strategies and programs should be adopted as part of the housing element to protect tenants and keep people in their homes? And what did we not ask that you'd like to talk about? What else should we be asking? So with that, I think we're gonna head into small groups, and then your facilitator will report back after the 40 minutes on what some of the key themes are. So looking forward to seeing you all in 40-ish minutes.
All right, I'm going to turn off the language interpretation now, just to make sure that everyone's got the same audio channel in the breakout rooms. If you don't see a little pop-up window right away, just hang tight. I will put you in a room. So you should see a little pop-up now. Click join. And someone, I noticed you're calling in on a phone. I'm just going to give you the ability to unmute yourself. If at any point in time you want to unmute yourself or raise your hand, raise hand is *9 or *6, I think. And to speak is, or raise your hand is *6. All right, putting you in a room. Welcome back. Hope you all had a good time talking to each other. I'm looking forward to hearing program ideas that were discussed. I think everyone is back now. Yes. Okay, great.
Hazel, do we need to turn interpretation channels on or?
I can do that, yeah. So again, reminder to everybody to please select the language channel that you would like to participate in. I'm moving into the English language channel right now. Give everybody a moment to get there. Okay, I will start calling on facilitators for report back. Does that sound all right? Okay, Deanna and Bill's group, you're up first.
Thanks, Hazel. We covered a lot of ground and discussed a lot of important issues. For example, we talked about homeownership and creating more affordable, some more programs that increase access to homeownership to stabilize neighborhoods. We talked about neighborhood planning at the neighborhood level, and also really strengthening neighborhood associations so that planning is a continuous process, so that implementation can, the implementation of the plan can really be owned at the community level. And we talked about creating policies that would give preference to existing tenants. For example, when condominium conversions happen. We talked about zoning changes and sort of really taking a look at our existing zoning and where higher density can be is needed without displacing existing tenants. We talked about amnesty programs for unwarranted units. So any units that are not currently up to code or are non-conforming to the zoning code in some way, as a way to really increase, preserve housing in a safe way. And I think that about sums it up. And there's a lot more that was shared and all captured in the notes.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all participants for sharing on these subjects. Up next is Caleb and Matt's group.
All right, thanks. We covered a lot. I think the main topics we really focused in on was prioritizing building deeply affordable housing. One strategy that was mentioned was having a moratorium on market rate units, although the group had mixed opinions about whether that would be useful or not, or the legality of that approach. We also talked about the impact that gentrification and displacement has had on the city and how it's changed the city over the years, and made it difficult to find affordable housing, especially for blue-collar workers, and just generally restricted housing choice about where people can live in the city. We also talked about prioritizing homes for the unhoused, and some of the more policy-oriented discussions and solutions were about right of return for residents in affordable housing when that housing is demolished and rebuilt with higher density, as well as building affordability on public land. I believe that's all, but please, Caleb or any other group members, let me know if I missed anything.
All right, Claire and Kalila and Shanae's group. They were small but mighty.
Thanks, Hazel. So we had a really interesting discussion. Participants were primarily concerned about how the unhoused population in the city is continuing to grow, and there's a lack of attainable emergency housing solutions that are being put forth. And in general, just not enough is being done about the homelessness crisis happening in the city. In addition, some solutions that we talked about were an increase in outreach activities to make sure that tenants are aware of programs that are happening that can assist them. There was also some interest in mortgage assistance, down payment, and rental assistance programs ranging from extremely low income tenants to all up to middle income tenants as well. There's also talk about land trust solutions to buy out properties in small flex areas for affordable housing, and also creating data-informed solutions to make sure that the programs that are needed can be as successful as possible. There's also a push for increasing collaboration amongst agencies, such as with the Oakland Housing Authority, and also looking into ways that the city can insist that affordable housing is being built. Thank you.
Thank you. Allison and Christina.
Yep, thanks, Hazel. So in terms of housing programs and needs, programs that were mentioned included rental assistance and first-time homebuyer approaches like tax breaks, revolving loans, and credit counseling. Housing counseling generally was stressed as being very important. Housing with supportive services was identified as a major need. And in terms of other needs, the digital divide was mentioned. A lot of low-income households don't have access to the internet, and how, as part of preservation and neighborhood services, can we increase access to that? Also talked about accountability for various housing programs and a desire for tangible metrics, as well as disincentivizing speculation, which is driving up a lot of the costs in Oakland. My group also really stressed that housing production of affordable and deeply affordable housing is a key part of reducing pressures. We discussed surplus land, how the city must build affordable housing on surplus land, but how do we allow flexibility for institutions like schools to add housing on their land? Some members talked about zoning as a hindrance to additional housing, and there was robust discussion about the challenges to funding more housing. And then there was also mention of exploration of an inclusionary housing policy, because affordable housing is not getting built in high resource areas. If I missed anything, group members, please put it in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Lakshmi Energy, your group.
Okay, I'll go, and then please let me know if I've missed anything. So there was, we had a good discussion as well. And one of the key things that came out of our discussion was there was an overwhelming concern about the safety concerns around that unhoused residents are facing, especially with lack of safety and the increase in fires and the unsound structures they're occupying. So there was an increased focus on not only having additional outreach for these programs that the city provides and accountability for the programs, but also to have housing accompanied housing for unhoused folks specifically, and providing services such as access to mental health services, access to quality transit, and access to food for affordable housing units. There was also feedback around engaging unhoused populations in the discussions to identify their concerns and why they might not be interested in moving to shelters or homes. And there was also one of the policy areas that was discussed was providing vouchers to the unhoused and incentivizing landlords to accept those vouchers, and the need for diverse dense housing production accompanied with a voucher system, and also to increase housing supply in areas such as Rockridge, for example. That's it. Rajiv, did I miss anything?
No, you said it. I think people also mentioned there was increasing racial segregation, including within Oakland. So as we think about programs such as whether we require on-site inclusionary housing or in lieu fee, we make sure that if there is housing being built and marketed in housing, in Rockridge, not all of the affordable goes somewhere else to maintain or actually bring back the diversity that used to exist in these neighborhoods.
And there was also one more suggestion to look at our in lieu fees and how they are not economically feasible for developers to put affordable housing. So there needs to be a coordinated approach to increase or look at requiring housing on site. I think that's all, but we'll have the notes too. Thank you.
Thank you. And then our last group was Shannon and Lauren, or Shannon and Laura, sorry.
Yes, hi. So in our group, similarly, priority to house the unhoused, as well as a major concern for the missing middle, and also support for mixed income housing. So not just having low income housing in one area, but really supporting mixed income housing. So folks of different income levels can live in the same neighborhood and being in the neighborhood where folks are going to school and work and that kind of thing. And actually supporting housing that is in neighborhoods of opportunity. So neighborhoods where there's access to grocery stores and transit and that kind of thing. Regarding the ADU program, there was a comment to help ensure that homeowners who are working on ADUs behind their home or in front of their home, that they are aware of the tenant protection rights for the tenants in ADUs. And then also another comment, which was around supporting local property owners rather than outside large property owners that tend to own multiple properties in Oakland. So perhaps finding resources for local property owners that might be smaller landowners. And actually a few good comments as well about measuring success. So when we look at our programs, how are we monitoring these programs and how are we looking at the impact of the existing programs that we do have? Although I did hear also some really good feedback about some of our programs as well. We just need more of it. And a good shout out for the RAP program and the assistance that they're providing as well to tenants. And if there's anything I missed or if anyone wants to add in the chat box as well, that would be great. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, everyone, for your input. We wouldn't be able to develop our housing element without it, so we are very grateful. We also take feedback very seriously, so I'm about to drop 3 links in the chat to some feedback forms. In these forms, you can tell us who you are, what brought you out this morning and afternoon, and how we can improve for the 4th workshop and outreach generally. They're in 3 languages. And then just also wanted to mention that we have a number of events forthcoming and happening soon. The 4th housing workshop will be in May. The recording of this meeting, as well as notes and translated notes, will be available on the Oakland General Plan Update website soon. You can also sign up for project updates at this link. So thank you so much for everyone's time. I'll hand it over to Lakshmi to close.
I wanted to take this opportunity to thank everybody who attended this workshop today and for providing your valuable feedback. So as Allison mentioned, we have a lot of events coming up. So please visit the General Plan Update website for to sign up for updates and also to get information on the events and how to register for these events and to look at past notes and meeting recordings. Thank you, and we will hope to talk. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Have a great weekend, everyone.
Yeah, and have a good rest of your Saturday.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, thank you all. Thank you so much. Good session.
Thank you, everyone. I hope this isn't the last discussion. We've got a ways to go. Have a great Saturday, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Kathy.
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Happy weekend.